Thank you very much. There are seats in the front. Do sit down. I hope everyone's got a handout. You will need it. Right. There's a stationary mic. I tend to wander around a bit. If you are not hearing me at the back, please let me know in some way. The God in whom Christians, Jews, and Muslims believe is supposed to be omnipotent, omniscient, and perfectly good. By God being omnipotent, I mean that he can do anything, or rather anything logically possible. That is, anything the description of which is not self-contradictory. He can, for example, annihilate the universe or change the laws of nature, but because it involves a self-contradiction, he cannot make me both exist and not exist at the same time. By God being omniscient, I mean he knows everything, what has happened and what will happen everywhere. Or rather, he knows everything logically possible to know, anything which is such that there is no contradiction involved in supposing that he knows it. If human beings have free will, as most Jews and Christians believe, so that it's not predetermined by our brain state or anything else what we will do, then it seems to me and to many others, God cannot know in advance what we will do tomorrow, for then it will not be up to us what we will do tomorrow. But if God exists, it will only be by God's choice that we have any free will, and so that there is such a limit to his knowledge. By God being perfectly good, I mean that all his actions are good actions, and he does no bad evil. So I've described to you what the claim that there is a God means, or what I'm understanding it to mean. And that's on your handout. So, why do humans suffer a lot, and why do humans do what is evil by causing other humans to suffer? An omnipotent God could have prevented humans from suffering or causing others to suffer. An omniscient God would know when and how much they would suffer or do wrong. And a perfectly good God would try to prevent such suffering and wrongdoing. Hence, if there is a God, there would be no suffering and wrongdoing. But there is suffering and wrongdoing. That is the atheist's argument, which I have just described to you, from which it would follow that there is no God. And I shall now try to rebut that argument. I shall claim that it is not a bad thing for someone to cause suffering or allow others to cause suffering, so long as certain conditions are satisfied. And I shall suggest that they are satisfied when the someone is God and the suffering is the actual sufferings of this world. It seems that the organizers have given out the wrong handout. What we are going to do about this will depend on how clear I can be in explaining things at every stage. What I have just explained to you is what you would have found out on the right handout if you had had it. The right handouts describe what it is for there to be a God, as I shall understand that. And I am understanding that by supposing that to say there is a God is to say there is an omnipotent being, an omniscient being, a perfectly good being, and I've explained what those things mean. I have now described the obvious objection to that from the fact that humans suffer and cause suffering to others. And I'm now going to explain why I don't think that objection is good enough against the supposition to rebut the supposition that there is a God. And I'm now going to claim that it's not a bad action for someone to cause suffering or allow others to cause suffering so long as certain conditions are satisfied. And I shall suggest that they are satisfied when the someone is God and the suffering is the actual sufferings of this world. So, I shall conclude that the evils of this world do not tend to show that there is no God. A human being is nonetheless good for allowing some evil to occur, that is, for allowing someone to suffer, so long as allowing that evil is the only way in which he can promote some good, so long as he does promote that good, so long as he has the right to allow the evil to occur, that is, it's morally permissible for him to do so, and for as long as the good is good enough to risk the occurrence of the evil. Now, this would have been on your handout, and I wish now to repeat those conditions. In the case of humans who allow others to suffer, it would be okay for them to do so, so long as 4 conditions are satisfied. The first condition is that allowing the suffering is a means to a good which could not be obtained without it. The second condition is that the good is in fact obtained. That is, if A allows B to suffer, it must be the case that B's suffering is a means to some good that couldn't be obtained without it, and that A does produce this good if he allows the evil to occur and thereby produces the good. The third condition is that A has the right to cause this suffering to be. And the fourth condition is that the good, which is the result of the suffering, is big enough a good for the evil to be allowed. There are going to be 4 conditions. I'll repeat these at times. All I'm concerned with at the moment are the conditions for one human to cause suffering to another. Right. For example, it would have been good for a human parent at a time before the availability of anesthetics to take a child to the dentist and to allow him to suffer, for the human to allow the child to suffer a tooth being filled for the sake of the child's subsequent dental health, so long as, first condition, that's the only way in which the parent could promote this good state of the child's dental health, so long as 2, the good state is thereby effected, the dentist succeeds. 3, so long as the parent has the right to take the child to the dentist. And 4, so long as the dental health is a good enough, good end for the parent to allow the child to suffer to achieve that good end. That's relations between humans. Now, humans in this situation would not have been able to give a child dental health without the child having to suffer, but God could do this. God could make the child have a healthy teeth without this process. It's only the logically impossible that God is unable to do. So, extrapolating from the case of suffering to the case of evils generally, and from that case to the case of God who can do anything logically possible, I suggest that God can allow an evil E to occur compatible with his perfect goodness so long as 4 conditions are fulfilled. And so, in the case of God, the first condition is that it must be logically impossible for God to bring about some good G in any other morally permissible way except by allowing E, or an evil equally bad, to occur. For example, it's logically impossible for God to give us libertarian free will to choose between good and bad. That is, free will to choose between these despite all the causal influences to which we are subject, and yet also to choose us to cause the good. It's not logically possible for God to bring about the good of us having such a free choice without allowing the evil of a bad choice to occur, if that is what we choose. God can't give us that free will and yet at the same time make us choose the good. So it's logically impossible for God to give us the free will of choosing between good and evil without the possibility of the evil occurring. And the second condition is that God must bring about the good state. He must give us free will if the point of his allowing us to choose is that good. And if he does give us the good state, then the evil is a necessary condition for that bringing that about. The third condition is that God has to have the right to allow the evil to occur. That is, it must be morally permissible for him to allow the evil to occur. And finally, the good must be a big enough good, or put more precisely, the probable amount of the evil which would result from allowing E to occur must be less than the goodness of G. All right, so I'm now going to spell out to you with examples ways in which certain kinds of good cannot be achieved without God allowing the evil as a means to them. I'm going to suggest that the goods are in fact achieved. I'm going to suggest that God has the right to allow this evil for the sake of the good, and I'm going to suggest the good is a big enough good for God to allow the evil for this purpose. And I begin by pointing out ways in which the first condition is satisfied for various kinds of evil which occur frequently on earth. I begin with moral evil. What I mean by moral evil is the evil which either deliberately or through negligence humans cause to each other. And I've already pointed out that the great good of having a libertarian free choice between good and evil logically cannot be brought about except by allowing the agent to bring about evil. But a free choice which made no difference to the world would not be nearly as valuable a choice as one which made a difference. It would be a great good for humans to have libertarian free choices which allow us to exercise genuine responsibility for other humans, and that involves the opportunity to benefit or harm them. That's this sort of free will I will call responsible free will. God has the power to benefit or harm humans. If other agents are to be given a share in God's creative work, it would be good that they should have that power too, although perhaps to a lesser degree. A world in which agents can benefit each other but cannot do each other harm is one where they have only very limited responsibility for each other. If my responsibility for you is limited to whether or not to give you an Apple iPhone 7 when you already have an iPhone 6, but I cannot cause you pain, stunt your growth, or limit your education, then I don't have a great deal of responsibility for you. A God who gave agents only such limited responsibilities for their fellows would not have given much. God would have reserved for himself the all-important choice of the kind of world it was to be, while simply allowing humans the minor choice of filling in the details. He would be like a father asking his elder son to look after the younger son, and adding that he would be watching the elder son's every move and would intervene the moment the elder son did anything wrong. The elder son might justly retort that while he would be happy to share his father's work, he could really do so only if he were left to make his own judgments as to what to do within a significant range of the options available to the father. A good God, like a good father, will delegate responsibility. But in order to allow creatures a share in creation, God has to allow them the choices of hurting and maiming, of frustrating the divine plan. So, by allowing such hurting and maiming, God makes possible the great good of humans freely choosing to benefit rather than harm each other, and thus to cooperate in God's plan. But human good choices are not merely good in themselves and in virtue of their immediate consequences. All human choices are character-forming. Each good choice makes it easier to make a good choice the next time. Agents thereby form their own characters. Aristotle famously remarked, quote, "We become just by doing just acts, prudent by doing prudent acts, brave by doing brave acts. That is, by doing a just act when it's difficult, when it goes against our natural inclinations, that is, our desires, we make it easier to do a just act next time. We can gradually change our desires so that, for example, doing just acts becomes natural. Thereby, we can free ourselves from the power of the less good desires to which we are subject. But again, the great good of us having the free choice of character formation, choosing the sort of people we are to be, can logically only be had if there is the danger that we will allow ourselves to corrupt our characters and to become bad people. But if we pursue the good despite contrary temptation, we would freely form a really holy character, not just a fairly good character. Parents want their children to enjoy what is good, enjoy doing what is good. And a God who hopes to provide for all his children an eternal life will want them to enjoy enormously doing great good, and that would involve having a really holy character. Remember where we are in the lecture stage. I'm trying to show you that there are certain great goods for which allowing, the word is allowing evil to occur is a necessary condition. And I pointed out free will in itself is a great good. But of course a free will that made no difference to anything wouldn't be nearly as worth having as a free will which made a difference to something. And not each time I do a good act, not merely does it do a good to whom it's intended to do, but if I do it despite contrary temptation, it makes me a better person. I'm more inclined to do good next time than I am before. So I gradually form my character. Now, so far I've been talking about moral evil. That is the evil which we do to each other or through negligence allow to occur to each other. Now let's come on to natural evil. Natural evil, what I mean by that, is evil of a kind unpreventable by humans, such as the evil of suffering caused by disease of a kind currently unpreventable. Natural evil of that kind provides opportunities to choose to do or not to do certain especially valuable kinds of action which are possible only as responses to evils. I can logically only have the choice of showing courage or alternatively showing self-pity in bearing my suffering if I am suffering an evil state. My suffering from disease, which I have the strong temptation to self-pity, gives me the opportunity to show courage. It's good that we should have the opportunity occasionally to do such actions which involve resisting great temptations, because thereby we manifest our total commitment to the good, a commitment which we do not make when the temptation to do otherwise is not strong. It's not a real commitment. So I'm beginning to show you that if the natural evil is necessary, or a certain amount of it, in order to give us a certain sort of choice, a good choice, not any good choice, but a certain sort of choice to react to it in the right way. It is good, too, among the good actions which we should have the occasional opportunity to do, is to help others who are suffering and deprived by showing sympathy to them and helping them to cope. Help is most significant when it's most needed, and it's most needed when its recipient is suffering and deprived. But I can logically only help others who are suffering if there is the evil of their suffering. In these cases, if there is a God, he makes possible the good of free choices of particular kinds between good and evil, which logically he could not give us without allowing the evils to occur. Or rather, it's the only morally permissible way in which he could give us this freedom. He could, it's true, give us the choice between trying to help others or refusing to do so without the possibility of any actual suffering, because he could, as it were, make people behave as if they are suffering but not really be suffering. For God could make a basically deceptive world in which other people appeared to be in great pain when really they were not. But in such a situation, first, we would not have the real responsibility for others, which is a great good. And secondly, it would not be morally permissible, in my view, for God to make a world where people are moved to help others at great cost when the others don't really need help at all. God, if he is not to deceive us and yet give us a free choice between helping and not helping others, must make a world where others really do suffer. And merely allowing the suffering caused by moral evil wouldn't give very much opportunity for the choices which involve resisting great temptations. For this we need disease, accident, and the weakness of old age. So, if, for example, I get a disease, this opens up the possibility of certain kinds of reaction, both by me and by my family. My family have the choice of either being callous, what he's got ill again, or showing compassion and sympathy. I have the choice of being self-pitying or trying to be cheerful about it. So it is, as it were, something that gives you a certain opportunity for reacting in a certain kind of way which you wouldn't otherwise have. And, as before, if you make the right choice, you gradually make yourself a better person, which you otherwise wouldn't have. Of course, God could make you a good person from the start, but it wouldn't be your choice. It wouldn't be you who have made yourself a good person. It's good, too, that among the choices available to humans should be the choice not merely of helping others to cope with natural evils such as disease, but of whether to reduce the number of such evils in future, for example, prevent diseases. But to have this choice, we need to know what causes the evils. The normal way in which we, or rather the scientists among us, supported by money from the rest of us, try to discover such things is the inductive way. That is, we seek to discover the natural processes, bacteria, viruses, etc., which bring about diseases, and then we construct and further test theories of the mechanisms involved. But scientists can only do that if there are regular processes producing the diseases, and they can only learn what these are by studying many populations and studying under which circumstances some disease is transmitted and under which it is lost. So, for the great good of this choice of investigating, or alternatively not bothering to investigate, there is required the necessary evil of the actual disease. If humans are to have the great opportunity of devoting their lives to scientific research for human benefit, or not bothering to do so, there have to be sufferers from disease to make this possible. Many of the early Christian theologians saw rationality, of which the ability to pursue scientific inquiry is a paradigm example, saw rationality together with free will as the two things which humans have which constituted their being made in the image of God. Okay, so another advantage of this is that it does allow you to not merely react personally in a certain way to the evil, but investigate, create theories, test them, and thereby benefit not just the person who's suffering, but future generations. It puts you more in control with the way the world goes. All the same, you may say, wouldn't it be better if God planted in us strong, true beliefs about the causes of all diseases and other natural evils, and then just left us with the choice of curing them or not curing them? Is having the opportunity to exercise rationality in the inductive way worth the price? However, if God abolished the need for rational inquiry and gave us strong, true beliefs about the causes of things, that would greatly reduce the difficulty of making moral decisions, and so to make it less easy for us to show total commitment to the good and form heroic characters. As things are in the actual world, most moral decisions are decisions taken in uncertainty about the consequences of our actions. I do not know for certain that if I smoke, I'll get cancer, or that if I do not give money to some charity, people will starve. So we have to make our moral decisions on the basis of how probable it is that our actions will have various outcomes. How probable it is that I will get cancer if I continue to smoke, or that someone will starve if I do not give money to a charity. Those decisions, under uncertainty, are not merely the normal moral decisions, they are also the hard ones. Since probabilities are so hard to assess, it's all too easy to persuade yourself that it's worth taking the chance that no harm will result from the less demanding decision. That is, the decision which you have a strong desire to make. And even if you face up to a correct assessment of the probabilities, True dedication to the good is shown by doing the act, which is, although it is probably the best action, may have no good consequences at all. So, giving you one further example of the advantages of a world in which there is a certain amount of evil. Not merely does it give you the opportunity to investigate and benefit future generations, which you wouldn't have, but it does put you in a personal situation that you don't know for certain the consequences of your actions. You know what the probable consequences of your actions, but not the certain ones. And so you have to face up to it. Shall I take the brave decision, which might not have any good consequences, or shall I just let it slip because maybe it won't do any harm if I smoke? Faced with the difficult decisions, that sort, by taking the right ones, once again, we build up our own character, which we wouldn't otherwise have the opportunity to do. So, both in order to give us the opportunity to deal with all important matters by exercising our rationality, and also in order to give us the opportunity of showing our commitment to the good most strongly by making our choices in a situation of uncertainty. It's good that God should not cause us to be born with strong, true beliefs about the consequences of our actions, and so that we should have the opportunity to choose whether or not to seek more knowledge of the consequences of our actions. And that will involve getting more data about the consequences of events. For example, it will involve studying what has happened to people in the past who have smoked, and then on the basis of that, developing theories, and this will give us the opportunity to benefit future generations and to make better decisions, but all the same, from this uncertainty position, we have the opportunity of taking the brave decisions which will enable us to form our character. Okay, so I've illustrated in certain ways how allowing the evil to occur, not making it occur, allowing the evil to occur, both the moral evil and the natural evil, gives us certain opportunities that we wouldn't have, opportunities of making the right choice, of benefiting other people. So it's up to us, not up to God, how it happens to them. And also thereby forming our own character, because each time you do good, you become more naturally inclined to do good. And so making ourselves. Now, that was only the first condition for God allowing evil to occur. The second condition is that, in fact, if he does allow the evil to occur, he will also give us the good, which is the point of it all. What about this second criterion? I've shown that various kinds of evil are necessary for the exercise of a libertarian free will, which makes important differences to ourselves, each other, and the world. But do we really have free will at all in this sense of freedom to choose what to do, given all the causes which influence us? As we make our choices, as we choose what we'll do in a certain situation, it seems to us that it's up to us how we choose. And it's a basic principle of rationality that it's probable that things are as they seem to be. You always have to assume that if it seems to you this way, it's rational to suppose that it is, because if you don't suppose this, you'll have no grounds for supposing anything. Because if you suppose, I shouldn't believe this unless I've got evidence for it, well, what will constitute evidence for it? Well, the evidence will be only that it seems like something else. But then if you can't believe the something else without having evidence for it, then you can't believe anything at all. So it's always rational to believe that things are the way they seem to be. Now, and I call this principle the principle of credulity. The credulous man is the rational man. He believes things are as they seem to be unless somebody can show him they're not. And the way it seems to us is that it's up to us how we choose. It used to be claimed, in the absence of contrary reason, it's rational to believe that things are as they seem to be. But you may say there is contrary reason. It used to be believed that science had shown that we are deterministic machines. But that view of science has been overthrown in recent years. Quantum theory has shown that even the physical world is not deterministic on the small scale. So it would not be surprising if the mental world of feeling, thought and choice is not deterministic at all. And it would not be surprising if any action of the mental world, that is any of our decisions, to produce small-scale changes in the brain wouldn't even disrupt the operation of normal physical laws, that is, the laws of quantum theory. As it may be that my choices make a tiny difference to the things in my brain, which the brain multiplies these differences and in consequence affects the world without interrupting the laws of nature. So I'm going to pass over this pretty quickly. It's rational to believe that things are as they seem to be. It seems to us we make choices. It's rational to believe that. In the absence of counter-evidence, there is no good counter-evidence, so it's rational to assume that we have free will. If it were ever shown that we don't, then of course my argument would fail. But I've suggested there's very good reason to suppose that we do have that free will. So given that there are goods and evils for which conditions 1 and 2 are satisfied, what about condition 3? Condition 3 was that God must have the right to produce this evil for the good state. Does God have the right to cause or allow evil to occur to humans for the sake of some greater good? The trouble may seem more acute in that in many cases, including some that I have discussed, good for one individual is promoted by evil endured by a different individual. Does God have the right to make you suffer for my benefit? To cause, or even sometimes to allow someone to suffer for his own good or the good of someone else, one has to stand in some kind of parental responsibility towards him. I do not have the right to cause some stranger, Joe Bloggs, to suffer for his own good or for that of Bill Snoggs, but I do have some right of this kind in respect of my own children. I may let my son suffer somewhat for his own good, or for the good of his elder brother, as when I entrust the younger to the temporary care of the elder, with the risk that the elder may hurt the younger. Or I may send my daughter to a neighborhood school which she may not enjoy very much, but which will benefit others of the neighborhood. I have such a right in respect of a child of mine because in small part I am responsible for his or her life and so many of the good things which it involves. It is because the parent, who is not merely a biological parent but a nurturing parent, is the source of much good for the child, that he is entitled to take some of it, or its equivalent, back if necessary, in the form of the life having bad aspects. If the child could understand, he would understand that the parent gives life, nourishment and education, subject to possible retraction of some of the gift. If this is correct, then a God who is so much more the source of our being than are our parents has so many more rights in this respect. For we depend on God totally from moment to moment, and the ability of parents and others to benefit us depends on God. But it must remain the case that God's rights are limited by the condition that he must not, over time, take back more than he gives. That is, he must be, on balance, a benefactor. But there do so often look to be lives in which the bad outweighs the good, about which we say it would be better for such a person not to have lived. I urge, however, that this is a wrong assessment of many lives about which you're inclined to say that. It's a wrong assessment of many lives because it does not take into account a good, which I have not so far mentioned, the good of being of use to others. It's an enormous good for anyone to be of use, whether by what they do by free choice, or by what they do involuntarily, or by what happens to them, including what they suffer. It's an enormous good for anyone to be of use. Right. Helping someone freely is certainly a great good for the helper. We sometimes help prisoners not by giving them more comfortable quarters, but by letting them, the prisoners, help the handicapped. And we pity rather than envy the poor little rich girl who has everything and does nothing for anyone else. And one phenomenon prevalent in contemporary Western world in recent years draws this good especially to our attention, the evil of unemployment. Because of our systems of social security, at least those which are operative in the United Kingdom, the unemployed on the whole have enough money to live without too much discomfort. Certainly they're a lot better off than are many who employed in Africa or Asia, or who were employed in 19th century Britain. What is evil about the unemployment in Western Europe, and in particular in Britain, is not so much any resulting poverty, but the uselessness of the unemployed. They, the unemployed, often report feeling unvalued by society, of no use, on the scrap heap. They rightly think it would be a great good for them to contribute, but they can't. It is not only intentional actions freely chosen, but also actions performed involuntarily, which have good consequence for others, which constitute a good for those who do them. If the unemployed were compelled to work for some useful purpose, they would surely be right to regard that as a good for them in comparison with being useless. And it's not only intentional actions, but experiences undergone involuntarily, or involuntary curtailment of good experiences, as by death, which have good consequences, which constitute a good for him who has them, even if a lesser good than that of a free intentional action causing those consequences. Consider the conscript killed in a just and ultimately successful war in defense of his country against a tyrannous aggressor. Almost all peoples, apart from those of the Western world in our generation, have recognized that dying for one's country is a great good for the one who dies, even if he was conscripted. Consider, too, someone hurt or killed in an accident, where the accident leads to some reform which prevents the occurrence of similar accidents in the future. For example, someone killed in a rail crash, where that leads to the installation of a new system of signalling which prevents similar accidents in the future. The victim and his relatives often comment in such a situation that at any rate he did not suffer or die in vain. Although they normally regard the suffering or death as on balance an evil, of course, they would have regarded it as a greater misfortune for the victim, quite apart from the consequences for others, if his suffering or death served no useful purpose. It's a good for us if our experiences are not wasted, but are used for the good of others, if they are the means of a benefit which would not have come to others without them. So I am suggesting that the great good of being of use is, of course, greatest when you freely choose to be of use. But it's also a good if involuntary. Somebody makes you do something useful, which has a good effect. Also, if some mere experience of yours is a means to some good for others, that's a good for you. Let me help you to see the goodness of being of use by a small thought experiment. Suppose you exist in another world before your birth in this one. You are given a choice as to the sort of life you are to have in this one. You are told that you are only to have a short life, maybe of a few days, although it will be an adult life in the sense that you will have the richness of sensation and belief characteristic of adults. You have a choice as to the sort of life you will have. You will have either a few days of very considerable pleasure of the kind, I am told, produced by heroin, which you will experience by yourself and which will have no effects at all on the world. Or you can have a few days of considerable pain, such as the pain of childbirth, which will have, unknown to you at the time, considerable good effects over several years on others yet to be born. You are told that if you do not make the second choice, those others will never exist, And so you're under no moral obligation to make the second choice. You can only have obligations to existing persons. So you wouldn't be obliged to choose to suffer pain in order that others might come into existence. So you have the choice, considerable pleasure, or by yourself, or alternatively, considerable pain, but a means of great benefit to others. You seek to make the choice which will make your own life the best life for you to have led. How will you choose? I suggest the choice is obvious. You should choose the second alternative. So, and if that's right, being of use to others, even by the pain you suffer, is a very great good to you. It follows from being of use, being a great good, that whenever God allows some evil to occur to B, that is, causes B to suffer, in order to provide some good for A, for example, the free choice of how to react to that suffering, that B is benefited as well. Whenever God allows whenever God allows evil to occur to B for the sake of some benefit to A, that is, of course, good for A. But it's also, thereby, B is of use not merely to A, but to God. He plays a role in God's plan for A. And to be of use to the good source of being in the redemption of his creation is an enormous good. The starving, the persecuted, and the abused are of use to the wealthy on whose doorstep they appear, because but for them, the wealthy would have no opportunity to be of use. They are the vehicle, the poor, whereby alone the wealthy can be saved from self-indulgence and learn generosity, and thereby they are of use to God himself. And to be of use to the good source of being in the redemption of his creation is an enormous good. The starving, the persecuted, and the abused are of use to the wealthy on whose doorstep they appear, I repeat, because but for them the wealthy would have no opportunity to be of use, and so they are of enormous use to God himself. When one takes into account that those whose evil state is the means of great good to others, and of course often to themselves, when one takes into account that great good of being of use, it becomes plausible to suppose that God has the right to cause the evil, because by causing that bad state to us, to a particular sufferer, he makes that sufferer have the great good of being of use to whoever it is, those to who thereby have the opportunity to do good. For however you weigh the one against the other, the evil, the suffering, carries with it the great good of being of use, which contributes towards making the lives of the victim, on balance, good lives, and so ones in which God has the right to include such evil. That is to say, why I'm emphasizing this great good of being of use is I considered surely there are some lives which we consider it would have been better if they hadn't lived because they had this sort of suffering. And I say, well, there may be such cases, but many of those which we are inclined to judge in that way, we don't take into account the great good for those people, that by their suffering, they are the means of good to others. Others are put in a position where they have the free choice of helping them. And those others have great responsibility for them, the way things go in the world, which they wouldn't otherwise have. And that's a good for the sufferer as well, a great good. But I must add, there may yet be also lives on earth which are still on balance bad. And in that case, God has the duty to compensate for the bad in the afterlife, so that the total life of such an individual will be on balance good, and that in his omnipotence can do. Well, remember, we're only discussing the third condition. God should never allow an evil to occur, or suffering or whatever, unless it is the means to a great good, and which he does produce. But the issue still arises, does he have the right to allow this individual to suffer for some other good purpose? And the answer is, well, it's a great good for the individuals themselves to be the means of good to others. Of course, there are other goods and evils besides that, but that itself is a good, which makes many lives which otherwise would be unbalanced bad into unbalanced good lives. That it is a good for us, not merely if we freely choose to serve others or to serve God, but if we are of use to others or to God by what we suffer, is also a theme in the New Testament. In several places it teaches that those who suffer in consequence of their choice to confess the name of Christ are fortunate is the word, to be allowed to have such a significant role. The apostles beaten for preaching the gospel rejoiced, quote, that they were counted worthy to suffer. And St. Paul wrote that he rejoiced in his sufferings for the sake of the Colossians. I come finally to the fourth comparative condition. That is, the good must be a good that's big enough to justify allowing the evil to occur in order to bring it about. Someone may agree with me, and many atheists do agree with me, that one does need a substantial amount of various kinds of evil in the world in order to produce the opportunities for various goods. But my opponent may feel that there is just too much evil in the world for the good that it makes possible. There's just not enough good, he objects, made possible by Hiroshima, the slave trade, the Lisbon earthquake, or the Black Death. With the objection that if there is a God, he's overdone it, I feel considerable initial sympathy. And when I now proceed to justify God allowing these things, I hope you will not think me callous. They are horrible things, and when they happen to people, we must weep. But in cooler moments, and I hope this is one of them, we must analyze the logical issues in as rigorous and a dispassionate a way as we can, and we must take very seriously the goods which the evils make possible. What makes these massive evils, such as the ones I've mentioned, what makes them massive is mainly the number of people involved. But if each suffering of 1,000 people is such that my four conditions are satisfied for it, then the suffering of the whole 1,000 will also be such that those conditions are satisfied. So, given that one person being maimed in the Lisbon earthquake provided that person with the opportunity to show courage and his relatives with the opportunity to show compassion and help, then 1,000 people being maimed provided 1,000 such opportunities. Each small addition to the number of sufferers makes a small addition to the number of those who can make serious good choices. And each small diminution of sufferers makes a small diminution in the number of those who can make serious good choices. And it is often the case that large-scale evils provide additional opportunities for good responses in the form of worldwide campaigns to help the victims and campaigns to help such horrors occurring again. Sometimes the problem with great evils is not the number of sufferers, but the degree of the suffering. If there is a God, is not the suffering which he imposes or allows others to impose sometimes too intense for the good which it makes possible? But note that we ourselves sometimes need to impose very considerable suffering on someone in order to bring a greater good, which could not be obtained in any other way. We can see this if we scale up the earlier example of the child needing dentistry, which you might have thought was a rather trivial sort of example, though if you consider the age before anesthetics, not too trivial. But let's scale it up a bit. Suppose that in some war zone where anesthetics are not available, a child has a gangrenous wounded arm, and that the only way to save the child's life is for a surgeon to saw off the arm. We would judge that despite the agonizing pain which the child would suffer, not merely during the operation but for some weeks thereafter, the child's parents would be right to allow the surgeon to saw off the arm. Analogously, God would be justified in allowing great suffering for the sake of very great goods, which it's not logically possible could be attained in any other way. And note that sometimes very serious evils are needed to get people to make good choices. By allowing the more serious evils to occur, God forces on people who have allowed themselves to live easy lives and so become insensitive to more ordinary moral demands. It forces on those people the hard choices which alone will allow them by their own free choice to begin to become holy people again. There are so many ordinary selfish people who for the first time see evils of serious torture or painful disease, and they are moved by those evils to make the life-changing choices which they would eventually become others, eventually become saints. There are so many people, one feels, who are sort of immunized themselves to the more ordinary evils we find around us, but will eventually, when presented with a very serious evil which they can do something about it, and that is the way back for them to salvation. Remember that just as good parents love their bad children as much as their good children, the perfectly good God will love the concentration camp commander just as much as the inmates of the camp, and he will go to great lengths to help the camp commander to start the journey back to holiness, a point which Jesus illustrated by his parable of the lost sheep. Remember, in the parable, the shepherd left the 99 sheep in order to go and find the lost one. But of course, that was pretty risky for the 99. And what the parable is designed, among things, to show is that God is prepared to take great risks in order to help those who've got lost. And bearing that in mind, and of course I'm not quoting the authority of Jesus in order to justify my point, which stands independently of the authority of Jesus, but I'm simply illustrating it by an example which may be familiar to you all. That is to say, if a good God would indeed love his bad children as much as his good children, and the only way to save his bad children is by exposing them to some very serious choices, then he will expose them to some very serious choices in order to save them as well as everybody else. Evils wouldn't matter so much if only the lesser evils occur, and so it wouldn't matter so much if we ignored them. What the objector is asking for is, yes, there should be diseases, but not ones which maim or kill. There should be accidents which incapacitate people for a year or two, but not for life. We should be able to cause each other pain or not help each other to acquire knowledge, but we shouldn't be able to damage our own or each other's characters. And the objector is suggesting that our influence should be limited to those with whom we come into contact, and we shouldn't have the possibility of influencing for good or ill distant generations. So that's a world which, if you ask the objector, he says, if there is a God, he's overdone it. He's suggesting God should create a toy world, a world where things matter, yes, but they don't matter all that much. And a good God would not be less good for taking a big risk with humans, and that is what I have suggested that a good God may well do. And each of the evils, if you think of it, is a means to a good, which of course people may or may not choose to take, but it's a means to a good which couldn't occur otherwise, and God has the right to do that in virtue of his being responsible for us every moment of our lives and so on, so long as he makes our lives on balance good. There are lives which are inclined to think they aren't on balance good, but if you take into account the great good of being of use, many of them are on balance good. And if some of them still aren't, well, his obligation is to make a person's life as a whole good. And if that involves, in some cases, giving them the evil first and the good after this death, then that too he can do. But surely, says the objector, there is a limit to the suffering which God would be justified in causing for the sake of the good which it makes possible. Yes, of course, and there is such a limit. And there is also a limit to the actual amount of suffering which any human suffer except by his own choice. There is a limit of time. These days it's roughly 80 or perhaps 90 years. And there's clearly also a limit of intensity. What the objector must be claiming is that the actual limit is too wide. If there is a God, he asks too much of us. But I have argued that if you take into account the great benefits, he probably isn't asking too much of us. Of course, God would be mad to allow endless suffering, to give endless such opportunities for painful service, but God does not give any of us, except perhaps through our own choice, endless suffering. He allows suffering at most for the short period of our earthly life, in order that in that life we may help others and form ourselves in deeply significant ways, and we would be the poorer without those opportunities. Thank you.